Hello.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
All right. There's Morgan. Hello, Morgan.
Hello.
Yeah, Jesse said he was going to be late, and I don't know if Amanda is going to be here. So, yeah. Yeah, so Morgan said he's traveling. So we had some pretty good meetings this week. We had the DevoWorm meeting. That was pretty good. We had the Cognition Futures meeting, and we had a cybernetics meeting. Oh, you're in Southern California. Thanks, Morgan. And so those were pretty good. I think the cybernetics meeting, we finished up the Mike 11 and Josh Bongard paper on machines, on 21st century machines. And Morgan made a comment at the end. Keep in mind that all the terms in this paper have been ruined by Silicon Valley. I think that was his comment. So that was, it's basically about how machines are living entities, or they're closer to living entities now than they've been in the past. And so it's pretty good conversation around that. Cognition Futures meeting, we've spent a lot of time kind of strategizing, and hopefully we'll be making some inroads this year on some good topics. We do have, and I will talk about this in a little bit, a couple of events going on, one of which is the Embodied Intelligence Conference. We need to get our abstracts in order pretty soon. So probably in the next week or so to at least know what we're going to put in. So that's good. DevoWorm, we did a good discussion on 4 different papers this week. If you go to the DevoWorm YouTube channel, you'll find that. Various topics in biophysics. Let me get into the upcoming events here. So the first thing is to highlight is the Embodied Intelligence Conference. It's going to be happening on March 20th through 22nd. And so, yeah, this is going to be online. This is going to be like it has been in past years. We'll have speakers. And, if you're interested in submitting an abstract or participating in an abstract, which is probably more likely if you're not Jesse or myself, or, I don't know if Morgan or Amanda want to submit anything. We'll be, collaborating on some topics. So we talked about the topics last week, and it's like a 15-minute presentation. So we'll be targeting that. This week I'm going to be attending myself in person this first annual Immerse Symposium. This is for the Center for Immersive Computing at the University of Illinois. And it's going to be hopefully an interesting session. They have a white paper here to read over. But I guess this is an emerging center, so they're trying to get people on board and get collaborations going and things like that. They have some interesting speakers from industry, from the Air Force, from Bill Buxton from the University of Toronto, and some other people who are involved in AI hardware, or in VR hardware, VR software, and so forth. So yeah, this looks pretty good. We'll be, and of course the design of content, things like that. So I'll be reporting back on that next week and tell you more about that. Then this is something that Hussain is going to maybe talk about a little bit, as well as some of the other things he's been up to. So this is the New Reality Hackathon. And so this is happening in New York City.
I just talk real quick. Yeah, the first hackathon integrating neurotechnology and AR and VR. We're doing it.
Yeah.
I'll be in March. Hopefully I can make it. I just applied, and they said they're reviewing my applications. So nothing is set in stone. I'm not confirmed going, but I've applied. Pretty optimistic. So yeah.
Yeah. And so this is going to be in New York City coming up in what month?
March.
Okay, so this is
it's March 8th through 11th, so it's next month.
Okay.
I wish they would tell us sooner, because I'd like to plan these things out in advance. And,
yeah. So it looks interesting. So the vision is professional development, of course, hands-on experience, and building for the future. And I guess the schedule is like a regular hackathon where you have the pre-hackathon workshops, activities, and then breakfast, and then finally you get to you work on the projects during the day. You have you have a mix of talks and work sessions, and then at the end of the hackathon on Monday, you present on what you've done. So that's typical hackathon structure. Yeah, and so is this sponsored by NeuroTechX or not?
I don't think it's sponsored by NeuroTechX.
Yeah. So I know that Morgan and Ankit Grover talked about this NeuroTechX hackathon that was going on last year, and always good things always come out of that. I don't know if it's quite like this though. This is sort of for neurotech and VR. So this is I guess a first shot at it to see what people can do. Yeah, the NeuroTechX hackathon was global, so it happened in many sites. But if you get to go, please report back on what you've done. It'd be great if you do something. But for now, why don't you tell us a little bit about your MIT Reality Hackathon experience?
Sure. Last week I met up with some other hackers over at DevPost. I met up with some other hackers at the MIT Reality Hackathon, and we created some accessibility support services for people with autism who are using AR and VR technology, so they can accessibility support services for people with autism and difficulty with overstimulating environments to use AR and VR technology more easily. We want to give them control to take advantage of audio and visual components so they can control them themselves so they're not easily overly stimulated by things.
Yeah. And so, what was the experience like working on something like that? I mean, what did you do during that?
It was great, as you can imagine. I think in many ways, first off, it was really, really great to see a lot of people from many, many, many different backgrounds, like different types of academic backgrounds. People who had never been to college were there too, all at MIT, one of the best places, probably the best place on the planet to do something like this. Boston was a really great city. I got to venture about a lot to see the piers, see some of the shops, and get to explore the city a bit, culturally as well too. And overall, it was a great experience. I mostly kept to myself. I was just so busy. It was like working on the project for the hackathon and basically all of my other commitments in my spare time. I didn't have too much time to meet new people unless they were people that I was particularly looking to meet. So that was just my experience, and it was a great experience though.
Well, great, yeah. And so when you go ahead.
Yeah, you actually did have to be careful because it wasn't like a prestigious academic conference. Everyone was like a grad student or a postdoc, or it wasn't that. It was anybody who could apply could get in, and I was a bit like, really? Like anyone who's an adult who expresses an interest in AR and VR, and I mean, they get accepted based on criteria. But I was a bit confused, just be like, I'm here at a conference with people who have never been to college before. And of course, they would let them in because it's all about hacking. It's all about making the apps and stuff themselves. So it's not like, only the most top tier prestigious professors and stuff can go. But I was still a bit like, that is, I I don't know, maybe I felt a bit questionable that I don't know, maybe I'm being too paranoid or obsessive over this, but it's I guess I'd feel more comfortable and more at ease if there was just a greater sense that the people who were there, people did a lot of vetting of their backgrounds academically and making sure that they're top tier in terms of like understanding stuff. Because I don't know, I've seen this in a lot of AR and VR communities where people want to be very, very accepting and inclusive of
Yeah.
anyone, regardless of their background, even like if you don't have like a bachelor's in like math or computer science or something. But on the other hand, I'll see people put together amazing stuff like making LLMs and developing scripts that can generate like images from text alone, like generative AI. And you ask them, okay, how does it work? And they have no clue. They have no clue. And I think to myself, like, where are you going to go with that? You know. So, anyways, that's just my 2 cents. Like, I was really grateful. My team, uh, yeah, we worked together pretty well. I think we got along pretty well. Yeah.
Well, good. Yeah. So I had a question about the work experience component. So, when you go to a hackathon and you participate in it and you sort of, sit down and you decide what project you want to do, how do you divide up the tasks? Is it like formal division of labor, or do people just kind of work on a problem until they get something working, or how does that go?
People have the different backgrounds, but we are more or less working together on the project where we'd all divvy up roles together as we solve it. Like officially, my background was as a scientist, as a researcher. There was another guy who was a data scientist. There was another young woman who was a designer. So we would look for people specifically for those backgrounds for the things that we were needing and things that we were looking for. So as you can see, like if you're inviting people like design, like UE and UX designers, or um like people who do like art and animation, like in Blender and Unity, like artists, then your academic background, they kind of don't really care. They want their ability to work hard and obviously be a good person. But like I will say, there was some like questionable stuff going on that I feel like you wouldn't really see it as an academic. Like I think a few things got stolen. There was like hardware that was stolen, and I think to myself like, yeah, I feel like that would never happen at like an academic conference. But it is what it is. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like MIT is a great campus. I think you can definitely feel that sense of innovation. I don't know. When my friends visited MIT, they just felt like the undergraduate vibe was grim. It was really depressing. Like they're like the kids here do not seem to be happy.
Oh,
But I don't know. I was doing my PhD at the University of Toronto. Let me tell you, U of T is where undergrads do not feel well. That's my take on things. Uh, UC, University of Toronto is like that too. But anyways, yeah, a lot of big ideas, a lot of people pushing forward innovative things, and you know, uh, it was for like AR and VR in general, not like for neuroscience, not like for cognitive science, not like from an academic perspective. It was for virtual reality in general. So that's where they wanted to invite basically a lot of different types of people.
yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah, it is that kind of a mix, and if it's kind of like people have the criticism of academia as being the Ivy Tower. So when you get outside of that, it's like you want to do anything like build something, you go outside of that, and it's like engaging with the community, and so there always has been that tension. But so it's a great report. One more question I had though, uh, what is the vision for the project that you worked on after the hackathon? Is there sort of
Yeah,
a vision for sustaining things, or?
it's interesting. Think about disability as a whole. And disability is the one class of intersectionality. Like you think if intersectionality is encompassing different classes like race, gender, orientation, disability is the one component or the one area that anybody can fall into. And you could even say that all of us as human beings are going to become disabled at some point. We're all going to lose our sight. We're going to lose our ability to move well. And in many ways, you could see in VR that it's the most in artificial and virtual reality. We want that to be accessible, as an experience, the same way we think of social inclusion through mental health and things accordingly. For this app, for Senses that we put together, we we did have some further plans. I'm not planning on working on it more, but in general, extending support services to augmented and virtual reality not just making sure, like, say, people who are hard of hearing can still do what they want to do in VR. People who might get too taken aback by bright colors can do what they want to do in, say, in AR and VR. I see it as just more part of more of a global movement towards great accessibility for people in general, especially for autistic people.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the reason I asked that question is because a lot of times you'll work on a project, and this could be in academia as well, and you get to a certain point, at like a stopping point, and then you forget about it or it falls by the wayside, and how he's happens a lot with sometimes some really good projects, but people
I mean,
just don't have
I'm
the
trying myself to be like broad and get experience across a lot of areas, and I honestly can't afford to like focus too much on the autism project
yeah,
for much longer if it's not really relevant to what I'm doing right now.
yeah.
That's where I'm coming from.
Oh yeah,
So,
definitely.
I mean, next month there's also New Realities. That's going to be in Colombia, so if I get accepted, then I can go there next month. If things work out, that I'm super excited for. Not only just being the first hackathon integrating neurotechnology and AR and VR, but also in some ways, also what they're doing themselves too. Like they're creating like neuroscience games, like so that people let people experience like neuroscience in the scientific world from in the virtual reality in the VR. I need to check more specifically what they're doing, but also like I think they're making BCI interfaces. That's one of the projects at New Reality next month. They're making BCI interfaces for VR.
Yeah, and that's using like off the shelf components or engineering sort of their own solutions or a mix of the two, I guess. So yeah.
I'll have to look into it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, well, so I guess we won't know until, but yeah, that's all great. Yeah. Thank you for that update, and I look forward to hearing more about it as we go along. It's an exciting time for AI or AR and VR. We have all sorts of new hardware. It's really being enabling a lot of creativity, and they're probably, I think one of the things we need are, really good sort of, ways to make content and like figure out what the best ways to interact with that content are. So I think it's good that people are, but also, we need to have hardware modifications for special populations or for special use cases. And so all those things, I think they'll eventually emerge, but it's going to take work. And that's part of why we have hackathons. So yeah. Looks like Jesse has joined us. Oh,
Thanks.
Yeah. Looks like Jesse has joined us, and Morgan has got it on camera now. So yeah, Morgan.
Hello from the airport.
Oh, hello. Yeah.
Hi there. Sorry, it's super loud here.
Oh, okay. Are there any things you wanted to say about the hackathon or hackathons in general? Or?
Not only is it, is there it's like a water polo team is here in the lobby, but outside we seem to be in the flight path to the local airport. So I did not catch much. Sorry.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's okay. I mean, we basically Hussain talked about his project and some of the things that they're doing in terms of like the kinds of hackathons that are happening in the AR VR space, and the practical sort of workings of that, which I think it's that's where we are with AR and VR. I mean, we have theory and we have people working on stuff, and it kind of sometimes gets decoupled. Again, like what Hussain was talking about with respect to people tinkering with things, but not knowing how they work, which is always an issue. Because you can tinker with things, and then you say, well, how does this actually work? Why is it that I can build say like an AI componentry to a VR system? How do I get that to work? And like corporate labs, they have people, all sorts of people with degrees, and they have teams where they have a lot of expertise, and it's, maybe more obvious there. But like if you're tinkering with that, it's kind of hard to acquire both sets of skills. Because in academia, in the labs, you can tinker with things, but it's not usually the focus. It's usually the focus is research or something else. So yeah, it's definitely.
Almost everyone I've talked to who work in AR and VR, they do get into it from a practical perspective, either from like an engineering background, a design background, a technical background. Hardly ever do I see like, say, the philosophers who study, say, the metaphysics of realism or reality, like David Chalmers, as one good example. Although, of course, he's written his book Reality Plus, who can now speak on how the world and reality are changing with those things too. But and from a theoretical, or even from the mathematical or technical point of view, like say computationally, like people will build an LLM, and then you'll ask them, okay, what's a transformer, and they're just like stuck, and they have no clue what to say. Like they cannot back up what a transformer is, and that can have issues,
Yeah.
Excuse me. So yeah, overall a great experience. Overall, really, really great experience. I will just say this again. I kind of would have preferred if they put a stronger emphasis on academic backgrounds. I feel like it would have gotten along better with people there. But it is for the perspective of like creative technology enthusiasts and everybody. Not just like PhD students and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks again.
I don't see enough philosophy hackathons. I would like to.
Yeah,
They already do hackathons. They just get together and
Yeah, I see. Yes. That is symposia.
It's not symposia. It'd be it'd be symposia in some ways, but yeah. But I would have loved to have run into other people with a philosophical background and even discussed, say, like computation, active inference, the metaphysics of realism. But yeah, it was a great experience. Great experience.
good. Okay, so that's great. So we'll be on the lookout for opportunities to do stuff like this. We've kind of been talking about hackathons. I'm a little reticent to sponsor a hackathon through the lab because it's a lot of it, organizational energy and things like that. But yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of put on something that would be a little bit different from the typical hackathon, where we actually have things like, philosophy and mathematics and cognosci and things like that. But again, that's a that's a thing that would take a lot of planning, I guess. But yeah, so what do we? I don't know if people want to do updates. Anything you want to? If we want to go around and say what kinds of things you're giving updates on what you're doing, or okay, Morgan's gonna set something up.
I need to take some notes before my update.
Okay, yeah. Amanda, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good.
I don't have too much of an update. It's hard when we meet like 3 times a week, and I'm like, well, nothing really feels new because we meet often. But those reading groups are still going well. We will be maybe meeting next week. I'm not sure because Jesse's traveling. But it seems like the plan for Cognition Futures is to focus on something that I've been working on, which we're calling embodied neurophenomenology, but I think it's a part of a much bigger project. It's like it's a manifestation of what we've been calling the Methods Project, which we have that Slack channel for, I'd say. So I've been slowly working on that still, even though it felt good to present at those couple of conferences. I feel like getting the project to a state where it was presentable at the conferences, it was just necessary to like completely chop it to bits and then only present a tiny piece of it. So I've been working on maybe the bigger picture stuff, so it's been harder to share, but I think the next Cognition Futures meeting we'll go through that and see where like where we want to go with it as a team, like where each of us might want to focus, and how those projects, like various sub projects, could be related. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for the update. So working in embodied neurophenomenology, Amanda presented at the last Embodied Intelligence Conference, and it is kind of hard to do kind of like theoretically motivated work in like kind of some of the conference settings that we have available. So like, if they say make a poster or do a 15-minute presentation on this big idea, it's like, how do I do that?
Yeah, for the Embodied Intelligence Conference, I found it easier because that was kind of the vibe of the whole conference, was like people had relatively big ideas that they were condensing down. But then the philosophy conference, and I knew this was going to be the case, but philosophy, like the way to present your project is to like contextualize it it's not to talk about like the big ideas. It's like often in academic philosophy, what you're working on is like so niche, and you have to explain all the context because everything you're doing is like it has to be in reaction to something else. So the philosophy conference was a bit more difficult. And then like what I was seeing in the other presentations was like, talking about, I don't want to say like small ideas, but like particular passages from a paper, and then like you nitpick, and like that's the start of your project. And like I said, I kind of knew that from my experience in philosophy, but that's why that conference was kind of it was difficult to prepare for that, and I feel like I didn't get as much out of that one. So I feel like what I want to do right now moving forward is work on like the big idea things and connecting the various bits that, like, I feel like I see the connections, but it would be useful to write them out, getting all my thoughts in a state where they're more easily shared and then collaborated on.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a challenge to find exactly the right venue for work. That's why I've been kind of thinking about these. We have this sort of we have this channel on the YouTube or this playlist on the YouTube channel for these kind of rough ideas where you can kind of just spend time kind of sketching out an approach, or because conferences usually they want it in a certain format. It's time pressured, so you might get a handful of questions, and it's very hard to kind of move forward on something like that when you have a very limited venue for presentation. There are other forms of presentation that might be also better. In this case, I mean, maybe something other than a formal paper, at least to start. And I'm not really sure what the best format would be for something like this, for a more philosophically oriented project. But that's something, I encourage us to experiment with maybe in the new year, figure out which ways are best to present this sort of stuff. The idea is to get it out and kind of get the synthesis going. And so, on the YouTube playlist is about synthesis. I did a couple of videos over Christmas for the holiday break. And so those videos are, some of them are getting some pretty good viewership. But the point is to have that archived, just kind of put yourself out there, put some slides together, talk about some of these ideas, and then just be able to go back and think about it and say, okay, what's the next step? I mean, there are different ways you can experiment with this, but so that sounds great. Definitely also, let's be on the lookout for other opportunities too that are maybe, something that's suitable for doing this. But really, we can do this in-house even, just, with in the Cognition Futures meeting or whatever.
Yeah, and we've
So,
also we've done a lot of that, which I really appreciate. And I think even though we were complaining about Notion, like what we do have in Notion is we have quite a lot. And it is quite organized. Not all of it. There's a lot that's disorganized, but like the stubs for different pages, what we have now in our like various glossaries. I think, well, I don't know. I don't know if I want to keep using Notion for this, but I do feel pretty good about what we have too.
yeah, I think that's great. So yeah, keep up the good work. And we'll keep working on it in the Cognition Futures meeting. So, yeah. I don't know if Jesse's in a position to give a little update or one.
Basically, I agree with what Amanda said about presenting the ideas differently and kind of where to go next. I'm particularly interested in. I don't think it's maybe the best to say making things into deliverables, but it's more along the lines of putting things into specific forms. I feel like there's been a lot of talking, and that's the way it goes. Like they're basically reading groups, and the meetings are, you know, very important discussion points. But I think a particular outlook for me this year is even just I want things to be a little more interactable outside of my own discussions. So I'm focusing it on myself that way, and I know that for a lot of the things that I'm doing that are cognition features and sort of beyond, the other sort of projects that are there in the background, to everybody else, right? But they're actually not for me. So it's like, how do I have to continue to keep making the bridging and scaffolding and the infrastructure to connect all those things that are going on to others and to the general world that things can be engaged in. So that's on my mind in the shortest bit. But yeah, I think that's only a comment for myself. Like I think everybody else is doing a really nice job of that. I really appreciate all the things that are going on in the various reading groups, and I think Amanda's done a really nice job with the Nova Wiener group that became the cybernetics group, and I'm looking forward particularly to where that one's going in terms of some of our discussions are going that way. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, that's a great set of insights. And then Hussain said with a low pass filter, you can block out background noise. That's what we used in our autism app. Well, it is. And apparently, like I think the latest version of Mac OS has like a, where you can, when you're speaking into the microphone, it kind of is a notch filter that kind of filters out background noise. But I was using it and I was having some problems with like it cutting out the audio. So I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of implementation issues sometimes with some of the new technologies. I know a lot of computers are now doing like directional mics and things like that where you can just pick up like the voice. But yeah, those are great. Great things. So yeah, that sounds great. That's a lot of practical experience you're getting with working on things like the autism app and other things, and that's what it's all about. So, Morgan, how are you?
Good. How's the background noise level here?
Pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of great conversations this week with reading groups. Really enjoyed that, and yeah, really enjoyed the focus that we have there. Things are still progressing with Biopunk Society. Their kids are doing a remarkably good job at kitting out this lab at BSL 2 level, and so with regard to that, we've got DARPA's Discover DSO Day coming up this month. So this is a like in-person meeting to talk about. You get to meet DARPA program managers and talk about what they're going to be interested in. So it's a broad spectrum of science and engineering disciplines. So it's called D3, and I can put a link in I'll put a link in Slack.
Okay.
So that'll be cool. Obviously, I think going with Biopunk Society people, so we're going to be kind of focused on the biological stuff. But I know that they've got some active neuromorphic computing projects, RFPs, and very curious to see what they're thinking in terms of, or who's potentially focused on something like organoid intelligence. It seems to be the term for the what was it called? Brainium? Is that the Indiana
Brainium?
project?
I think so.
Brainium. That was the reservoir computing project that was organoid hybrid chip.
Oh, okay.
And let's see. So yeah, just wanted to point out a couple things that dropped in Slack here. The interview with Marcel Messelin in the HBM podcast is great for anybody. This is the person who wrote the textbook on cognitive behavioral neurology.
Yeah.
And it's got lots of interesting backstory comments too. that's really cool. And like somewhat similar in computational psychiatry. Or I think maybe I dropped this in. Did I drop this in cybernetics? Active Inference Lab had an interview with Chris Frith.
Okay.
Or Free Energy Principle. Okay. Yeah. I put it in computational psychiatry.
Okay.
A little up there.
Yeah.
Again, some interesting. Because he shares an office with Carl Friston, there's lots of interesting backstory. He's asking him about papers, and he says something like, well, Carl puts my name on a lot of papers. I think it's just because we share an office.
Yeah.
So loving the fact that was it Astral Star Codex is also this old did an old blog that was called The Last Psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I used to laugh out loud reading like this is a decade plus ago. so that was a nice blast from the past, and yeah, really enjoyed that. He's still anyway. It's been interesting to see this this story continue to kind of play out in terms of he keeps writing on this, and it seems to be a lot of it's sort of like with the Levin discussion. It's a lot of kind of updating our terms to catch up with the science, in terms of like, well, how do we talk about things that are genetic disorders when in fact what we're really talking about is genetic determinants of neurodevelopment or something like that.
Yeah.
And that I think is definitely a legitimate topic for discussion. I just I just hope it doesn't degenerate into arguments about vocabulary and not a focus on the actual pushing the actual science forward.
Right.
Which again, this all just to remember, this all started with a senior schizophrenia researcher saying that the Human Genome Project was a failure, which no, it wasn't. Just so we're clear on that.
Yeah.
It was good science. Let's have more of that. And yeah, so and then interesting. So again, through some of the Biopunk Society, just being exposed to a lot of lab automation technology, and I've dropped things in brain organoids that relate to that. So this big meeting, Society for Laboratory Automation and Screening, and again, just really interesting to hear. Well, technically starting today. Just really interesting to see what is happening in this space, because it's as you can imagine, this is where the multiple forces are converging. like tech is already has a certain mastery. Our breakthroughs in kind of biological understanding, and certainly kind of nanoscale techniques that are used for this kind of single cell assays and things is at a new, has reached new heights, and so combining this all together with which is essentially automation or robotics. It's just remarkable. So there's a lot of announcements that are around these conferences. So I'm just trying to follow them as best I can remotely. But the one paper that was really interesting this week was this one from St. Jude's Children's Hospital that is showing what you could do with assembloids. That again is really interesting from a biotech standpoint. Assembloids are easier to grow, they're easier to culture.
Yeah.
And so like that talk I pointed to about a month ago from San Diego pharmaceutical researcher. Assembloids allow them to do a lot of things at scale that and he distinguished his work from Alison Moytree's, saying like, I work with assembloids who does organoids, and we can do stuff at scale. It's interesting, this assembloids on synaptic plasticity in human thalamocortical assembloids. It shows you that you can do this. You can do some interesting things with these smaller assemblies. less complex assemblies. And again, it's all about what's your question.
Yeah.
So that was interesting, and right, some 3D bioprinting there, and yeah, new Earl Miller paper, which seems to be this is obviously a theme, but planar spiral concentric traveling waves distinguish cognitive states in human memory. But I only saw last night, so
Yeah.
yeah, but I want to follow up. Oh, and speaking of LLMs, or I think I heard LLMs come up. This Allen Institute. Well, I know I've sent Jesse and Bradley a bunch of links that have passed in my feeds on LLMs. It's incredibly, we could drop everything else we're doing and just focus on LLMs, right?
Yeah.
But Allen Institute has this new Dolmer. Anyway, it's again another kind of open source. We're going to show you how we made this, plus I think a bit more of the tools. Anyway, I think some of these groups are also trying to, like Meta, they're trying to own the space by being more open and gathering a community around their project. And it's the only, as consumers, we get a bit of a benefit that they're rolling these out and making these more accessible. But I'm curious to hear what other people think about what do we want from them, and how easy, or in particular, we've talked about them with regard to both the Adam Saffron Royal Society paper or RFP, and in particular, like having a tool that helps us do science better, right? And I've seen a lot of interesting projects. I haven't seen something that people have worked into have added to their workflow. Right. But again, I'd be really interested to hear other people's thoughts and experience with that.
Yeah, that's great. So we'll talk about maybe those two papers that you mentioned later. But yeah, that's great stuff. And the LLMs, it's like, this is one thing about like AI and, a lot of these fast moving technical fields is that you can't keep up with it. You just have to pick what you want to do. Like, even if we dropped everything and did LLMs, it would still be like, we'd be lost, I think. But I think there's a lot. So if the Allen Institute is doing stuff with LLMs, what is that biological or neuro related?
Yeah, so this is their specific AI group. So like they've done some good stuff before in terms of releasing like big journal article corpus. A couple tools again for kind of dealing with the fire hose of research that we're all being hosed down with, or drowning in. I don't know what's the what metaphor do I want. And yeah, so it doesn't seem to be particularly focused on, say, making sense of the Allen Cell Institute or Allen Cell Science group data or something like that. Like I think that would be cool if they were, but it does seem to be again, like a tool for augmentation, or, well, I think they're all trying to run around and do anything that, see what sticks to, and see what gets a bit of community built, because I think they're all trying to fight for kind of developer mindshare.
Yeah.
At this point. Well, and I think they all feel like ChatGPT is so far ahead that they've kind of lost a lot of mindshare.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that may be true, but we do have like a lot of open source models on like Hugging Face, where you can actually run them on your local machine and train them on custom data sets and things like that.
Yeah. No, for sure. But again, like that kind of work is still rather specialized, and still, like, again, I'd be more interested in the tools that, the archive sanity preserver level tools that are just, just recommending a smaller feed of papers that are actually human digestible. like we like the comment from the paper where it was just like, if we understood what every cell was doing, would we be able to explain this phenomenon? And it's just like, well, we would if our mind was capable of taking in all that information, but it's not. So
that was a discussion we had in, I think it was in Thursday's meeting, the machines, where we're asking, like, well, there's this idea that you have say like a neural network, or it could be a brain, and you say, what is each cell doing? Can you trace back every thing that happens to a specific pathway or cell? And we can't really do that, but we can explain things at a higher level. And so we had a good discussion about that. I'm not going to get into it too much, but if you want to go back to that recording, it's in there. So, so that, there are a lot of good things here. We talked about, well, I don't know if I want to go through the channels, but I have a couple papers pulled up. The network neuroscience channel is, pretty active, and we've got a lot of interesting things in there. So it kind of stopped 2 weeks ago at a certain point in that channel, but there's been a lot of stuff in there on a lot of really interesting things. So we have this paper here we talked, I think, about in the Cognition Futures group, Understanding Divergence, Placing Developmental Neuroscience in its Dynamic Context. That's actually by Danny Bassett and some colleagues. This is on talking about like neurodevelopment and individual differences in neurodiversity. It's a good paper to kind of go over maybe at another time. Different studies on brainwave frequencies, sleep restoring an optimal computational regime in cortical networks. That was actually Amanda who found that. So this is kind of a nice overview of what sleep might be doing. Another paper on,
and as it also feeds back into our kind of reading group of criticality.
Oh yeah.
EEG.
Yeah. Then there's this paper on circular and unified analysis in network neuroscience. So, about like different types of causality and how we deal with what's going on in different brain networks, and of course a lot of stuff on LLMs and language models. So this is the brain language model here. Is this the thing you were talking about from Allen Institute, or is this something else, Morgan?
No, I think that's a foundation model for fMRI.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And as you can imagine, there's there's been a number of projects kind of developing in parallel with this kind of focus because we're all foundation models and LLMs these days, right?
Yeah.
But this, again, it's really interesting though, because it really has, the analysis landscape has really changed, and I'm really curious. The FSL course is going to be this. HBM is in Korea, but FSL course is going to be in Japan this summer, and I'm kind of curious to go and see what the discussion's like in terms of how much the kind of analysis packages that people have always used are getting supplanted by basically extensions of PyTorch and TensorFlow.
Yeah.
And pre-trained models. I'm curious in the discussion.
Yeah, it says in zero-shot inference mode, BrainLMs can identify intrinsic functional networks directly from raw fMRI data without any network-based supervision during training. So that's good. And then that generates interpretable latent representations that reveal relationships between brain activity patterns and cognitive states. So they're basically trying to use this type of model to find networks. So I guess you define the sorts of things you want a network to, like the function of the network, or I'm not really sure how it would work in practice, but basically you can find networks associated with brain states.
And this has come up with our discussion of again, like Amanda and I have been meeting for a bit, looking at analysis techniques, especially for EEG. And, it's when you're just working on raw, like resting data, we don't have any ground truth of it. Right? So you can create these new filters that give you these new decompositions. I think it would be better to use psychophysics data sets and kind of know what you put in and see how well the system or your new filter technique pulls out kind of known inputs and things first. But
it's interesting because when I ask people to define a transformer, as a litmus test, see if they really know what they're talking about. It's always a decent answer, a decent analogy. Like, can you define a transformer? Like, people talk about LLMs all the time, like ChatGPT and everything. But what do you mean as a transformer? And it's like that's a pretty mechanical. It's a pretty thorough way of explaining it. I think I really appreciate it. At least, even if it is sometimes a bit kind of analogous, you'd have to say. But I appreciate that. I appreciate all that.
Yeah, there's a good. That just reminds me. There's like a blog post on Hacker News was like Markov chain is the original language model or something like that. Anyway, it's a very nice simple exposition of Markov chains.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, we did. If you want to go look at neuroscience networks, there's a lot of good stuff here. The Muslim interviews here that that Morgan mentioned,
and sorry, if you scroll up again, to the Twitter, it's a little bit further. Louise.
This one, yeah.
I gotta say, really like this guy's Twitter feed. So it wasn't actually like looked him up and seems to be an emotion cognition researcher at the University of Maryland.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wasn't familiar, but has consistently interesting set of recommendations.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this is, I guess, this paper is also has implications for, reproducibility and analysis. So if you think about how people have constructed, fMRI networks or other types of neuronal networks, the one of the things that you don't really have a good handle on is causality, like which area is communicating with another area, or what's pushing something from one area to another. And so this is kind of about, people might use some techniques like correlational techniques, which don't give you that kind of power. So a lot of papers are just kind of generating networks from correlations. And what they're saying is you need maybe more in-depth analysis to sort of getting at some of the true networks, because our networks that we generate are usually just hypotheses, and they don't necessarily, they could reflect what's going on in the brain, or they could just be like, the best hypothesis given the evidence we have. So this is where they talk about here, many analyses in systems neuroscience neglect to test new speculative hypotheses against benchmark empirical facts. Some of these analyses inadvertently use circular reasoning to prevent existing knowledge as a new discovery. Here I discuss that this problem can confound key results and estimate that it has affected more than 3,000 studies in network neuroscience. So this is very much like most published science is wrong type vibe, the famous paper that was, kicked off a bunch of hand-wringing over p-values. And so, without getting into the paper, it's always provocative to see something like that.
Definitely. Speaking of Conrad Courting,
Okay.
I gotta find a Twitter feed that he had, a Twitter discussion he had with someone on that was creating tools for again, like using language models to well, I think they're basically someone who's got a startup trying to create a psychiatrist from language model.
Okay. Yeah.
And some back and forth with Conrad on Twitter.
Wow.
Again, he's usually pretty good.
Yeah.
I'll find that.
Okay. Yeah. So let me go through these a couple. Well, let's see. This is these two papers that I pulled up from the Network Neuroscience channel. So this one is Planar, Spiral, and Concentric Traveling Waves Distinguish Cognitive States in Human Memory. So we talked about a paper like this.
It's Ermentrout.
Yeah, Ermentrout is on this. So,
okay, so is this an old paper or no, it's new.
This is new.
Okay.
But we talked about a paper with a similar theme a while back, like I think late last year. And they also talked about like these concentric traveling waves. I'm not really sure, it was, I don't know if it was memory or not, but it was definitely in the same theme. So, this abstract kind of goes through why you're looking at these types of waves. A fundamental challenge in neuroscience is explaining how widespread brain regions flexibly interact to support behaviors. So it's like this dynamic aspect of the neural networks. We hypothesize that a mechanism of neural coordination is brain oscillations that propagate as traveling waves across cortex, and distinctive patterns that control when and where different regions interact. So that other paper, they also identified these spiral waves. To test this hypothesis, we used direct recordings from humans performing multiple memory experiments and a novel analytical framework that measures the direct propagation of oscillation. So this is using EEG. Is that correct?
Sorry, I just saw this last night, so I haven't
Okay.
looked. But I'm assuming it's saying neural decoding and brain-computer interfacing.
Yeah. We found that traveling waves propagated along the cortex, and not only the plane waves as seen previously, but also in spirals, sources and sinks, and more complex patterns. So this is interesting because, we talk about networks as like this collection of nodes and edges. And then, we don't really, sometimes we talk about the dynamics of that network, so things flowing between edges. But this is actually putting like sort of a topological twist on that, saying that there are these waves or these like sort of propagation patterns that you can actually characterize. You can also characterize sources and sinks, which are important for systems. If you think about like your neuronal network as a system, which has, so it passes things from one place to another, and then there's like some sort of sink of energy or a sink of information or a source of information or a source of energy, and you can plug those into the model, and you have a systems model instead of just a network from correlations.
Yeah, it definitely reminds me of a lot of the previous cognition features discussions we had regarding some of the theories of the the brain and the body, between the mind and the external worlds, and how taking advantage of theories from waves, from like wave theory, you can actually explain them in similar capacities and in similar contexts. So yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. Then they talk about sort of how these are maybe useful to understand broad cognitive processes, and these findings show that complex spatiotemporal patterns of traveling waves underlie human cognition and are relevant for neural decoding and brain-computer interfacing. So there's this connection with neural codes, such as they are. We've talked about that in Cognition Futures. We kind of talked about that with we talked about the Romain Brett paper on coding, which was the contentious paper and we never came back to the discussion on those on that paper. But this is a brain and behavioral sciences paper where they have the comments at the end. They publish like 30 pages of comments, and so we never did go through those. We need to pick that up again because that's an interesting topic. But also here they're just saying, you can actually look at the coding as maybe something like a very simple, what we might think of as like a computational code, which is like, is it binary? Is it some sort of code that we can read out? Or is it, some of these more topological patterns that are also kind of a code or relate to a code? So
I see that we missed Danny Bassett talking, Lauren Ross and Danny Bassett talking about their paper yesterday.
Oh, okay.
Causation in neuroscience, keeping mechanism meaningful. But
where was this? Where did this happen?
It's the Neuroscience and Philosophy Salon.
Oh, okay.
And of course it's Luis Pessoa.
Oh yeah. Well, that's always on YouTube, so they you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd love to. There's a lot of papers and there's that we need to.
Oh yeah,
we need to have a special reading group to cover Danny Bassett papers.
It's always an LLMs fest here, or like LLMs. Like if you want to keep up with the papers, you drown. So you have to pick your battles.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if there's a larger literature on these kind of spiral waves. It'd be interesting to see what.
I know the earlier link there is that Earl Miller's got a paper about oscillation features changing with cortical layer depth. but he does have I mean, I don't know if I'm confusing. Maybe Amanda can correct me, but he's got some papers about anesthesia that are definitely, I think, building on some of these experimentary like ideas.
Yeah, we definitely saw some papers that were talking about traveling waves.
With Emery Brown, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I want to say it's like a 2022 paper. And so anyway, maybe that's, I don't know if that's why Earl Miller flagged it, is that he was already using these ideas. But really interesting, and again, this also definitely relates to how epilepsy does inform brain science, or like whole brain electrophysiology, in the sense that like with these kinds of electrical storms in epilepsy, you can learn something about general electrophysiological properties of the brain, and as well as I think some of this stuff definitely is also coming from kind of finer hippocampal work too. Right?
Yeah, we would always use epileptic subjects, like the data sets for epileptic subjects, when determining the effectiveness of EEG recording technology. It's just so perfect, and being able to demonstrate different voltages. So yeah.
Right. And of course, and as patients that have medical reasons for surgery, they give us ground truth from a lot of different things to give us the ability to do invasive recordings as well as EEG, etc. But you see this with the patterns. Yeah, there's just a lot of traveling wave phenomena that you'll see with epilepsy.
Yeah, and then this other paper here, which is synaptic plasticity. So this kind of goes into from kind of brain networks to these assembloids. And so this is in the brain organoids channel. And so I'm not going to go through that channel, but I did want to pull up this paper. So this is actually, I'm not familiar with this group, but this is synaptic plasticity.
It was a new one, St. Jude's.
Yeah.
So Memphis.
Right. So in the DevaWorm meeting, we actually talked about organoids and some of the morphogenesis in organoids and how that, happens. You get budding in I can't remember what the type of organoid was. I think it was like lung tissue or something. And you get this budding. And so it was showing the process by which you get this morphogenesis. And so they were able to recapitulate some of the stuff that you would see in an actual tissue. So that was kind of exciting. In this case, they're looking at synaptic plasticity in thalamocortical assembloids. So, we've talked about the sort of the organoid typology, where you have organoids, which are these these cells in culture that you're trying to differentiate into analogs of different organs. You have embryoids, which are sort of an analog of an embryo, so you get different types of tissue that differentiate and form, layers. In this case, we have an assembloid. So an assembloid, and we talked about how they're just kind of sort of more loose association of cells, but you do get these, type of cells that you would find in thalamocortical assemblies in the brain. And in this case, they're talking about synaptic plasticity. So this is where you get cells that are synapsing on each other, and they have these, of course, plasticity at the synapse. And so that's important in memory. So you have different types of synaptic plasticity. You have long-term potentiation and long-term depression. So as you get activity, there's sort of a potentiation or depression that's associated with activity over time. So you get these different types of plasticities. This tunes synaptic efficacy and are essential for learning and memory. Current studies of synaptic plasticity in humans are limited by a lack of adequate models because we can't reach in and look at the synapses in vivo. We can do things with cell culture, but it's kind of hard to get it in context. So if you have 2 cells in culture and they're, you can establish long-term potentiation. Is that the way it might work in a network? And so we don't, this is why we might use an assembloid model for this. Here we model the thalamocortical system by fusing human-induced pluripotent stem cell-derived thalamic and cortical organoids. So what they did is they took organoids. They started with pluripotent stem cells that are induced pluripotent stem cells. So they're using an input of induced stem-like state, and then they've derived a thalamic organoid and a cortical organoid. And then they combine the two, so they fused them together. So functionally, they're fused into one assembloid. Single nucleus RNA sequencing revealed that most cells in mature thalamic organoids were glutamatergic neurons. So in just looking at the thalamic organoid, they found that in the single cell or the single cell RNA sequencing or single nucleus RNA sequencing, it allows them to look at like gene expression and sort of the RNA sequence along with the expression values or the abundance of different transcripts, and they're able to get a profile for glutamatergic neurons. So that's a pretty specific way to determine a glutamatergic neuron. You might be able to determine it by some sort of function or maybe some marker, but they're actually using RNA-seq for this. When fused to form thalamocortical assembloids, thalamic and cortical organoids, so these are the fused assembloids, form reciprocal long-range axonal projections and reciprocal synapses detectable by light and electron microscopy. So basically, when they fuse these two organoids together, they form this assembloid where they're forming projections into each organoid, and they're synapsing on the kinds of cells that you might expect in the brain. So they're getting this sort of functional integration, at least somewhat, to some extent. And then this is detectable by light and electron microscopy using whole cell patch clamp and 2-photon imaging. We characterize glutamatergic synaptic transmission. So they want to look for glutamatergic transmission at the synapse. Thalamocortical and cortical thalamic synapses display short-term plasticity analogous to that in animal models. So what they're basically doing is they're doing the RNA-seq to determine whether the cell is glutamatergic. Then they're using patch clamp and 2-photon imaging to see if that function is replicated in the assembloid. Thalamocortical and corticothalamic synapses. So in the brain, you have these pathways from the thalamus up to the cortex and then back down to the thalamus. So you get these loops, you get these types of projections that allow you, to get sensory information from different modalities. They get kind of put together into one set of projections in the thalamus, and then they project out to different parts of the cortex so they can be processed. And so there are a lot of relays in there and loops that are important for cognition, both multisensory and sensory specific. So a lot of these synapses displayed short-term plasticity analogous to that in animal models. LTP and LDT, which are long-term and long-term potentiation, long-term depression. These were reliably induced at both synapses. However, their mechanisms differed from those previously described in rodents. So that's one thing about these models, these cell culture models, is that they don't exactly match up with what we know in, say, like animal models. They match up functionally, but the specific sort of way that they happen is different. And that may be because, it happens differently in different species of mammal or, whatever. because you can look at rodents as a comparator, but a lot of things differ, say, between human and rodents, but we still use them. Thus, thalamocortical assembloids provide a model system for exploring synaptic plasticity in human circuits. So, and this is, of course, the abstract, or the graphical abstract here, where we have these two types of organoid brought together as an assembloid. They're making recordings separately, and then they're looking at the integration. So that's an excellent paper on some issues in sort of replicating brain networks in a cell culture.
Yeah, it's good to compare that to the Noblish Vienna work in their 3-part dopamine system assembloid, or where they, again, combining multiple areas.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say that in the neuroscience networks, 20 minutes ago, the video dropped of the Danny Bassett talk yesterday. So there's a link to the mechanism and causation in neuroscience that's there.
Okay.
And but going through Conrad Gording's Twitter feeds reminded me that some stuff that dropped in Dev AI, this new, and I put a tweet from one of the lead authors. Yeah, check it on Neuroscience Networks, Jesse. But this science paper, grounded language acquisition through the eyes and ears of a single child.
Yes.
So where they're training on, yeah.
We're going to talk about that later.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, it's interesting work, but yeah. So yeah, it's great. Thank you for that, all that stuff, Morgan, and of course Amanda and Jesse have also, and Hussain have also contributed to the channels. I actually didn't want to talk about one thing. When I was talking with Hussain yesterday, he pointed me to a paper or an interview that he had done in Science, which was, it was on
on Twitch, with Twitch.
Yeah, the Twitch live streaming. So this is Hussain Ather.
That's me.
Yeah, live streaming Science.
I got featured in Science several years ago when I started using Twitch, a streaming platform that people use for gaming. It's mostly used for gaming. I started using Twitch to stream my scientific research, and people would stop by and have discussions about what I was studying when I was doing a zebrafish analysis on the zebrafish phenotypic zeta. And people could stop by, they could see what I was doing, I would have discussions with them, and it was a lot great. Really taking peer review to the next level. You could say that. So
yeah, this looks like an interesting article talking about sort of Twitch streaming, and of course YouTube you can do streaming as well, and so I mean it's really, I think it's a great kind of approach, because you can do a lot of things in streaming or in videos that you can't really do in papers. Like we talked about this earlier, where you can do things like maybe you can do live coding in a stream, or you can do like a longer term unpacking of a paper. So this is really interesting stuff. And then of course these platforms allow you to get followers and people who maybe wouldn't engage with your work otherwise, or
I would even say for our group, for oral, if we want to do something that, I understand, like these meetings, these Jitsi meetings, I guess technically anybody can come.
Yeah.
But if we want to do something that's meant to be more streamed towards the public, like Twitch would be the perfect example of a tool to use. So, yeah. I mean, I say like this meeting because I know technically anyone interested in talking about these conversations like in science and neuroscience is welcome to join. It's people basically use Twitch for streaming anything like cooking. like you want to show off your baking abilities, stream it on Twitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is to go like do stuff from like virtual reality. Like you can do, it's a little technically difficult, but you can stream from like your headset or, things like that. So that'd be kind of interesting. Although putting that together is a little weird. I've been doing a lot of experiments with that and trying to figure out how to use, kind of like a VR world to kind of move that to a video format and then kind of do things interactively like that. But it's
People absolutely do it. Usually,
Yeah.
usually what they'll see, they'll have two cameras, one showing yourself with a VR headset in the real world, and then another showing the screen of what that person is looking at in VR. It's not too complicated usually.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a good. I think I posted this in VR in Neurotech. There was a good meetup with a meta engineer or researcher working on habitat. So this is the I mean, you could call it a VR environment when humans have joined. It's homes and other kind of buildings that they're set up where they're doing kind of human robot interaction research. So the idea, specifically focused on, or certainly with the goal towards like assistive technology, assistive robots. But at this stage, it was also just things like, let's, what difficulties does the robot have following you around the home? And just some other things like is the robot getting in your way? And does the robot understand how to hover but not be under your feet?
Yeah.
And so there it was interesting. I can post a link to it was recorded, so there should be a video of it now too.
Okay. Yeah, please do. So this is so this was a great interview. Hussain, that just really looking at how to engage people at different levels of sort of interaction. So you could have these more formal meetings, or you could have like a informal stream. You could a lot of live coding is a natural sort of way to do this, but there are other things that would be.
Yeah. The best thing is always being flexible, right? The way we talk about with academic conferences and research settings is very different how you communicate and speak and what you show to a global like general audience. In many ways, that's why I don't just stream research and science and programming. I'll play like Pokemon and play video games, keep people entertained and stuff too. But yeah, especially like it's cool. But ultimately, unfortunately, Twitch as a platform, it's not the best for like academics. It is more geared towards gaming and stuff like that. So you can make use of it too. I mean, it's probably better than like TikTok per se. There's also YouTube Live, there's YouTube Live, and they that might be more better for even say like these discussions, these workshops and salons like Bassett. So but yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to see the salon back. I think they took some time off. So yeah. Okay, yeah, thanks. That was good. Next thing I wanted to talk about was so I promised this. So we talked about this a while back. There were some we talked about Linda Smith's work on putting a GoPro camera on a baby's head and just letting the baby walk around a room and see what they interact with. And as it turns out, they kind of explore the world far differently than we might surmise from like adults, right? Like they fixate on certain objects and try to explore them, things like that. And so there were a number of papers this week, or I guess one paper, and then there was another paper associated with this, and that where they kind of did this, but they put the data that they collected from the camera into a neural network model, and they trained it, and so that's what we're going to get at. And then of course, Linda Smith and a colleague wrote a paper in 2017. It was like a hypothesis article talking about this very thing. So let's take a look at all this and see where we are. This is the paper. It was Linda Smith and Lauren Sloan. They're both at Indiana in psychology and brain sciences. And, they kind of published this, I guess they call these hypothesis and theory papers. So it's basically proposing this idea of a developmental approach to machine learning, ? So basically, Linda Smith's work is on development, on constructivism and other things like that. And she said, you have this visual learning that happens. Why don't we use that as a sort of a grist for machine learning models? So at the time, we didn't have, deep learning was just kind of starting to blow up. And we had a lot of machine learning methods that were not what they are today. So it's that field's moved pretty fast. But the abstract in this paper reads, visual learning depends on both the algorithms and the training material. So we have good algorithms, do we have good training material? We need both. This essay considers the natural statistics of infant and toddler egocentric vision. So this is where you want to know from the perspective of the infant or toddler, what's the world that's being explored, have a framework of what the interactions look like. These natural training sets for human visual object recognition are very different from the training data fed into machine vision systems. So again, most training sets in machine learning are just snapshots of the world. They don't really have like egocentric perspective at all. Usually they're like from the perspective of someone taking a picture, but they're usually not like in the context of active exploration of the environment. In this case, you might have not only that sort of active view of exploring the environment, but from the perspective of what an infant or a small child would do. Rather than equal experiences with all kinds of things, so rather than just having like what we might call a normal distribution or a representative distribution of things that we might do in a machine learning model. So we might say, well, we need to sample the world, evenly so that we can get, a good representation of all different types of objects. So we might have a bunch of cups at different orientations. We might have cups in different with different backgrounds and things like that. And that's our well-trained model. But actually, toddlers don't experience the world like that. What they do is they experience extremely skewed distributions with many repeated occurrences of a very few things. So if we put aside our idea of a sampled space or out of distribution objects, what toddlers are doing is they're looking at a couple of things. They're looking at it many times over, and then that results in a skewed distribution of the data of the world. So these natural statistics are not Gaussian, I guess would be the point. But they're also not, they don't really represent a lot of out of distribution stuff. They're just kind of like focused on a couple of things. And though highly variable when considered as a whole, individual views of things are experienced in a specific order. So there's this time dependence to the distribution that we usually don't have in machine learning. We usually have identically independently distributed data sets, which means that we take pictures and we kind of give them samples and we might randomize it, and we have to draw generalizations from a bunch of cubes that are in different orientations, but there's no linkage in terms of time, so there's no sequence. Or we might train a model on a time series, but the time series itself is just kind of like, a one-off. The specific order is important, basically. So you need to have these individual views, but in a specific order, with slow, smooth visual changes moment to moment, and developmentally ordered transitions and scene content. So this is where you not only have these time series, but you have things that may be growing complexity over time. So if you had a machine learning model, you might train it on a very few objects and just really kind of do a deep dive into those objects and explore it and throw it around the room and do things like that. And your observer would get all this information about it. And then later on in training, in another stage of training, you might engage with more objects and you keep moving in that direction. So that would be, a developmentally inspired data set, I guess you could say. So we propose that the skewed, ordered, biased visual experiences of infants and toddlers are the training data that allow human learners to develop a way to recognize everything, both the pervasively present entities and the rarely encountered ones. So they're saying that you can deal with things like out of distribution, information, or you can deal with like generalization by having these skewed, ordered, and biased visual experiences. And so this is a way that human learners and I guess other animals do this, and so we should be able to do the same in machine learning. The joint consideration of real-world statistics for learning by researchers of human and machine learning seems likely to bring advances in both disciplines. Okay, so let's put a pin in that. At this point, there's a lot of kind of thinking about this and people talking about it. And that's what we're going to get at. So they define learning here as adaptive intelligent change in response to experience. So again, experience being like related to human learning, synaptogenesis, learning of context, things like that, and adaptive intelligent change, meaning like that learning builds upon itself. So this paper that came out in 2017. This paper is brand new. This is from yesterday on the archive. And this paper is from a group from New York University, psychologists, computer scientists, data scientists. And it's called Self-Supervised Learning of Video Representations from a Child's Perspective. So this is where they talk about this work. I did not see that. I don't know if they actually cited Linda Smith in this, but I don't know. So this is the abstract. Children learn powerful internal models of the world around them from a few years of egocentric visual experience. So when we talk about an internal model for like of what people learn as children, we just we acquire things in development through these kind of egocentric visual experiences that were described in the last paper. They say from a few years of egocentric visual experience, but if you think about it, that's just kind of the grounding for it. So it's not really like all you ever learn. You just use that type of way of learning, that skewed distribution, as the basis for future learning. So if we learn something in childhood, it may bias what we learn later. So you could have a model where you train it in this way, highly biased, ordered sequences of events, and then apply that training to further training, which would be maybe the normal kind of training regimen for a machine learning model. And that would give you a grounding for what you're going to learn later.
Hey, Bradley.
Yeah.
Are you aware of what sort of scale the learning process to the application process is really applied? Like, let's say you learn like a child learns what a cat is. They see pictures of a cat. They see cats in real life. But then they see other things when they get older. They'll see like a tiger or something that is also could be considered a cat, but obviously looks nothing like that small domestic creature they saw. when they were a kid. Do you know what extent these sort of like say self-supervised learning algorithm or like let's say image-based self-supervised learning algorithms in the context of say visual capabilities, to what extent on such a small scale to more larger global scale of more practical processing, to what extent those can really be like extended for what babies do and for what machines do. And of course, this is always a constant problem with machine learning, with computer vision, with image recognition. Like you could, either I found that there's always this trade-off between precision, how precise the details are, and separating signal from the noise, like generalizability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that they're not going to solve here. They're going to say that you can use this, and we use it in this model, but I don't know how far there's a comment later I'm going to get to about that too. So yeah, it's one question is like, if I identify a cat in development and I see something that kind of looks like a cat, but it's not really a cat, I need to like acquire sort of categories for that. So that's going to be a problem in some of these approaches. How do we build categories? How do we generalize? And I think like in infancy or in development, we get like people, you interact with things in the world when you're an infant, and then later you start to build these more sophisticated models of generalizability. So you think, yeah.
I would say, especially when you look at infants and children, you really pay close attention to their sensitivity towards information processing.
Yeah.
Understand what sort of precision are they applying as they understand like labels themselves too. Like, are they being very rigid and fine tuned with like the strict definition of a cat?
Yeah.
Or is there something more generalizable that they're picking up on more easily? So, to the extent that that's applied to machine learning problems, is just there's a lot of practical use there too. So
yeah. So So then, recent advances in collecting large-scale, longitudinal, developmentally realistic video data sets and generic self-supervised learning are allowing us to begin to tackle this nature versus nurture question. So they're relating it to nature versus nurture. So, I mean, in a model, you could build like a set of innate mechanisms that would give you categories. You would then, the experience would be on these specific things. And then, I guess a miracle happens or something. But I guess these are details that are still being worked out on this. However, existing work typically focuses on image-based SSL algorithms and visual capabilities that can be learned from static images or object recognition. This ignores temporal aspects of the world, so that temporal ordering isn't there. To close this gap, here we train self-supervised video models on longitudinal egocentric head cam recordings collected from a child over a 2-year period in their early development, which is 6 to 31 months. So they actually have data from an egocentric viewpoint of an infant or a young child. They then have these self-supervised video models, which just means that the child walks around and just explores the world, and that's, I guess, the training that the model needs. That's the temporal information that the model needs. The resulting models are highly effective at facilitating the learning of action concepts. So this is something that they're going to talk about from a small number of labeled examples. For example, they have favorable data size scaling properties and display emergent video interpolation capabilities. So these action concepts are not really they're not really features. You're not doing feature selection. You have this sort of action concept. So like if I interact with a ball and I bounce it, that's a sequence of events. I have to explore the different ways that the ball can bounce, and that's an action concept, which then later there's maybe like a more sophisticated model of physics that you develop that explains it, but you have to explore these objects, and that's how you get. So it's not just like images at different orientations, it's actually engaging with the thing. And of course, that also, they don't talk about embodiment here or enactivism or any of that, but that's an important part of this. And so but this is just talking about taking information from video. So there's sort of an implicit embodiment here, but we're not going to talk about embodiment explicitly. Video models also learn more robust object representations than image-based models trained with the exact same data. So these video models then have more robust object representations, as you might expect, because you have the object in these action sequences that then the model can learn. And so, it's kind of like if I just give you a bunch of images of like a ball and I rotate it, you could say that's a ball. And this is what a ball looks like, and it's round. But then seeing what it does, it's playing, you can throw it, you can bounce it off the wall, you could squeeze it, things like that. That's important too. These results suggest that important temporal aspects of a child's internal model of the world may be learnable from their visual experience using highly generic learning algorithms and without strong inductive biases. So that's something that they kind of made a breakthrough on this. I guess we have Linda Smith cited, but I don't know if that specific paper that we had read before is cited in here.
No, I didn't see it.
All right. So yeah, this is basically I guess the image here. The top row shows the original sequence of frames. So they're using this platform SayCam. They have the original, the masked, and the predicted. So the top row shows the original sequence of frames. The masked row in the middle shows where 90% of the spatiotemporal patches are randomly masked out. So one thing you can do is you can show the original data, you can mask the original data to sort of obscure the information, and then the bottom row shows the predictions from the model change on child S. So these are the predictions of the model, and it matches the sequence in the original. The model is trained to predict the masked patches from the visible patches at the pixel level. So this is why you're doing the masking step, just to see if it's operating at reconstruction from the pixel level. So this kind of shows active recognition tasks. These different models, SSV2 and Kinetic 700, these action recognition tasks, and they're just validating this for 10-shot and 50-shot conditions. So this is just technical stuff where they don't pre-train the model. They just kind of use the data, and this is what basically, actually orange is pre-trained, green is not pre-trained, and magenta is purely an image-based reference model, and cyan represents the model pre-trained with Kinetic 700 data. So there are different ways of doing this. And so this is a t-SNE embedding of the video clip, so they're able to sort of predict clusters of these different action sequences. So you have closing something, opening something, holding something, picking something up, throwing something, covering something with something, and so forth. So you're getting these things that when you're exploring the world, you're getting these different sequences and actions that are identified. And what they do in t-SNE is they're taking the multidimensionality of it and plotting it out in these 2 dimensions. And, they're defining different clusters within this embedding space. So you're creating an embedding, and you're able to get something that's separable. And, that's good for our machine learning models because we kind of want to be able to identify these different sequences with the models. And so, yeah. So let's see. This part here, the main difference between Kinetic 700 and SSV2 is that in SSV2, people perform instructed actions where the objects involved in the action are specified and carefully varied across clips to abstract the action concept itself as a template. The videos in Kinetic 700, on the other hand, are in the wild, clips downloaded from YouTube, so they are much less controlled with respect to potential shortcuts or biases in the data. So this SSV2 data model is where you have very clean instructions, you have very clean action sequences that are sort of pre-segmented out in a sense. Kinetic 700 is where where the model is trying to abstract things from clips in the wild, so it could be just like, there could be a lot of background noise or something like that, or background activity. So, this is again something that we deal with in machine learning, where we have very clear images versus images masked sort of by a background. And you can see here that we have these SSV2 and Kinetic 700 models. There's some performance variation here, but the accuracy of the kinetics model seems to be a bit higher in some cases. So that's basically what they've done in this paper. And so I guess what they're finding here is that it's, they're finding a pretty good set of results here. So this is, in the discussion, they basically say that they've done this. They've been able to get these action concepts. They were able to recognize them with a small amount of labeled examples and interpolate unseen videos with plausible and novel completions. And so they also display favorable data size scaling in downstream tasks, suggesting that we can expect to see substantial improvement in model capabilities if we train our models with developmentally more realistic amounts of headcan data. So this is something that we need maybe 2 orders of magnitude more data than what they currently put into this paper. So that means that you need a lot of data, but you need a specific type of data. There are some limitations to this. We considered a limited number of tasks to evaluate the capabilities of the models. So that means that, you have maybe these tightly constrained tasks. And so in that sense, it's kind of like a lot of machine learning benchmarks. They're very stereotyped things. And so maybe if you put a model like this out into the world, it's maybe less successful. So future work should consider a larger, more diverse range of tasks that can probe the capabilities of these models. So for example, what they can and cannot do in much more detail. But we also are missing an intuitive physics aspect. So we talked about before the sort of the top-down categories that we might use later in development to put some of these things into place. So if you have a cat, if you explore a cat in these videos, you train the model on what a cat is, but if it sees a puma or a tiger, it might also classify it as a cat or misclassify it as a cat. So if we have these categories, that would help. But also there's this aspect of intuitive physics. So intuitive physics is an important aspect of a child's internal model of the world that we have not rigorously evaluated in our models. And so there's I think a paper by Linda Smith here in Piloto et al. 2022 here on intuitive physics. So that's this paper. This is a good paper on this. And then this same group has another paper. This is I don't know if this isn't exactly the same paper. This is from the 2nd of February. This is a little bit different. This is grounded language acquisition through the eyes and ears of a single child. So this is Brendan Lake, Amin Orhan, and I guess it's more or less the same authors. But this is actually on visual linguistic data streams. So this paper is the abstract. Starting around 6 to 9 months of age, children begin acquiring their first words, linking spoken words to their visual counterparts. So now we're taking that visual stimuli and we're kind of connecting language to it. So this is where maybe we're getting some of our categorization models through language. So we have this visual linguistic data stream now. How much of this knowledge is learnable from sensory input with relatively generic learning mechanisms, and how much requires a stronger set of inductive biases? That's the question they're asking in this paper. Using longitudinal head mount camera recordings from one child aged 6 to 25 months, we trained a relatively generic neural network on 61 hours of correlated visual linguistic data streams, learning feature-based representations and cross-modal associations. So they're using the linguistic visual data stream to learn these things. Our model acquires many word referent mappings present in the child's everyday experience, enables zero-shot generalization and new visual reference, and aligns its visual and linguistic conceptual systems. So now we've got the linguistic aspect to this, and this is giving us a conceptual map and a set of categories. These results show how critical aspects of grounded word meaning and are learnable through joint representation and associative learning from one child's input. So this is just a single child used as the training data, but we have these visual linguistic models that then are important for learning things. So this deals with the aspect of categorization more. So, philosophers and cognitive scientists have argued that learning a new word requires sorting through a vast, potentially infinite set of candidate meanings. So this is a big space of meanings that that could be, So for instance, when a child hears the word ball in an utterance, how do they learn to associate that word with a round, bouncy object, the correct visual reference, rather than other features, objects, or events? So ball is like, you know what a ball is, but you don't know what the word for a ball is. You can explore a ball, and an infant probably doesn't know what the word ball is, but they know what the object is and the properties. So associating ball with that then is something they have to learn from language. Young children are highly adept word learners. At 6 to 9 months, they begin connecting words to their visual counterparts. By 18 to 24 months, they can comprehend 300 words on average, mostly nouns. How to get children get started on word learning, what ingredients are needed to learn word-referent mappings from early experience. And so that's the set of questions that are framing this. We introduced the Child's View for Contrastive Learning Model, CVCL, which instantiates a form of associative learning that is cross-situational, tracking the co-occurrences between words and possible visual reference to determine their mappings. CVCL interprets this idea, the recent advances in multimodal machine learning that integrates representation learning and associative learning using a contrastive objective that coordinates two neural networks, a vision encoder and a language encoder. And so trained in a self-supervised manner, using only the recordings from the child's view and no outside labels, the contrastive object brings together the embeddings, or vectors of video frames, and linguistic utterances that temporarily co-occur. So you're mapping this linguistic map, or this linguistic embedding, to the visual embedding, while separating those that do not, treating the absence of co-occurrence as an implicit negative evidence, as shown in figure 1b. So we'll go to 1b in a minute. But they operate from this model CVCL. This is their model that sort of merges language and images, their image data set, and they're using these to sort of build this map. And so let's see. So this is, we have figure 1. So this is figure 1, CVCL model architecture and evaluation procedure. So this is the sort of the sequence that we have. We go in time, we have our time point, and we have our visual experience at each time point. And there's an utterance. So there's an utterance associated with the object in the view. So you have this toy, you see this block, the triangle, this frame here, it goes in, this frame here, boop, this frame here, hey, look here, the cat, this frame utterance, yeah, and so on and so forth. So you can just map these utterances with visual objects. Then you have these visual data, you have the language encoder. So you have a vision encoder, a language encoder. You have these transforms between V and U. Then you have V prime and U, which is the image X prime. This is another vision encoder, which is V prime. And then there's another language encoder, which is W prime. So the original language encoder is W. This is W prime. So this goes over 2 periods of time. These are 2 images of 2 different utterances. The language encoder, you have V prime and U prime. And then you basically have this cosine transform between the 2. and we have this attraction and repulsion. So these are attracted, these like with like. So the utterance is attached to the image, the correct image. The wrong utterance or the wrong image is repelled. So basically, you're trying to associate those two through these encoders. And so that's basically their model, to sort the scenes by action and then find the right utterance, and that's the goal. So then the question is asked of the agent, which one is the ball? So you have a ball and you have other images and the distractor images, and the idea for the task is to correctly associate this with a ball. And so we can see that you have these candidate images. We have these different visual encodings, V1 through V4, and we have this maximum cosine transform of VI versus U star, which is basically where we take ball, put it into this language encoder, and we get out U star, and then we compare that to these different visual images, and we find the maximum, the maximum of the set of V and map it to U star. So that's what they do here. Again, this is more what they're doing. This allows for generalization, so you can actually look at different types of butterflies, attach the word butterfly to different examples, and so that allows for generalization. So you have butterflies of different types here, and it's all associated with the same utterance, butterfly, butterfly. And so then you have a series of butterflies that you can generalize to. The same with buckets or buttons or spoons. And so these are all sort of at a certain probability. So you might see, this is definitely a butterfly. This is maybe not so much a butterfly, but still it's 13.3% likely to be a butterfly. So you have this probabilistic model of different, shapes and colors of objects, and that allows for the model to generalize. And so then, so there's this generalizing to novel visual exemplars, and this is using the same training runs. We also measured VCVL performance on the Concal object evaluation datasets containing naturalistic object categories derived from this citation 33. This evaluation included 64 visual concepts whose corresponding words were all present in CVCL's vocabulary, with images containing a single object in a white background, inspired by the kinds of laboratory experiments used to study infant language development. And so this allowed us to examine whether the words learned by CVCL generalized to out-of-distribution visual stimuli, that is, novel category examples on an atypical background. And so CVCL demonstrates modest knowledge of these additional visual concepts, with 16 of the 64 concepts scoring better than 50% correct, an additional 42 concepts scoring above chance, 25%, the overall accuracy being 34.7%. So this is interesting that they can do this sort of looking at novel visual exemplars and deal with these out of distribution concepts. So this is good stuff. But then there are a couple of outstanding questions. This is a question that Dennis Jabodon had on X or Twitter or whatever it is. And he read this paper. I think this is
Twitter. It's Twitter.
Okay, it's Twitter. Yes, thank you. This is a Nature feature on this set of papers, and this guy is a developmental neurobiologist. So he's really into this, but maybe not into this exact field. He says fascinating study, also because of its limits. The AI struggled to learn the word hand, for example, which is normally learned early in life, arguably because babies do not primarily use vision to experience their own hands. So you can see the problem with this method is that they assume a certain model of development, which may not always be the case for everything. So you're basically taking visual experience, you're attaching words to it, and you're learning it in a certain way. That may or may not be the way we actually learn everything. We might learn parts of our body, say, differently than objects in the world. And so there's a lot that we can do with these models, but we're thinking about sort of, whether or not we're, actually recapitulating development or using some sort of development-inspired strategy that is good enough. So, yeah. So why don't we discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. They didn't see this explicitly. I'd love to if you could share that PDF. But trying to explain that rapid explosion in kids' vocabulary is I would say the goal here for those who are coming at this like me, although it was 30 years ago now.
Yeah.
But looking at there's a bunch of phenomena in language acquisition that are really interesting and really again like machine learning people look at with envy, in the sense that like, wow, kids do this so easily, in a somewhat seemingly unsupervised way, although us parents try to supervise.
Yeah.
try to guide. Would that be prompt engineering? I don't know, but yeah. So it's really interesting to see this, because because I'm thinking about the child's database, and we used to have these recordings, but we didn't have the tools to process them.
Yeah.
Of kids speaking at these kinds of time age ranges.
Yeah.
And it was so it's just cool to see. 30 years later, it's just like, oh, somebody can finally do that thing that we always wanted to do, and have the computational resources to process it, and the models to put it together. So it's for this old guy, it was great to see. But yeah.
Well, I was thinking about the child mind data set when I was going through this, and I was like, man, there's probably a lot there.
Yeah, I mean, so the problem with the Child Mind Institute data is that it starts at 5.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I've dropped, I forget now, brain organoids or computational psych, but of course I kind of put them together in the sense that like we're trying to fill in this age range from 5, from development, super, embryo to 5.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I forget what was the age of these kids. Sorry.
Oh, I think like
this child.
Let me see if I can find the paper.
But this is toddler age, right?
Right.
And it's hard data to get. It's and again, like it's that's what makes it so interesting, is that this is exactly the age where there's in a sense like language is. All this language formation is happening when the kids are still pre-verbal.
Yeah.
And we know this from the studies of mothers who live under airport landing areas.
Yeah.
That give the growing fetus even a large amount of noise will slow language acquisition.
Yes.
And it's the Child Mind Institute. The data is really interesting for post 5 language development, or it's not so longitudinal though, right? Because this is like deep longitudinal
Right.
modeling, in the sense of like being able to have that video flow associated with the language acquisition. So yeah, this is great though. Again, it's the kind of stuff with the child's database that we only dreamed about 30 years ago.
Yeah. Great. So Hussain, did you have anything to add? Or?
No, I don't have anything to add in particular on this, but I think it's really interesting and fascinating, just overall in general.
Yeah.
Especially from the perspective of like learning how does language form, how do people create languages to begin with, and how people learn languages through society in general, between how humans do it and how AI does it.
Yeah.
That's a great point, right? I mean, it might be easier for us to get data in second language acquisition. And not necessarily as I mean, there's a bunch of things going on with early brain development as well that is obviously key in terms of having critical periods, right?
Yeah.
We are, again, like it's remarkable to me as someone who's gone through Middlebury's language program.
I've basically so much pain about me, but I could not. I couldn't adjust it. I had.
What's
sorry. I was just talking to myself. Sorry.
Just how quickly, if you cut yourself off from, if you focus on one language and put yourself into that immersion environment, like after 3-4 weeks and you start dreaming in that language, like it is really remarkable, how quickly you can progress in a second language acquisition. And, like there's a bunch of things we can do experimentally that in terms of tracking those people and so I mean I'd really love to do like 3-month 3-month long tracking of people doing second language acquisition from scratch.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it would be a really interesting opportunity, and it's something came up with Evan Gordon. So there's some interesting things in brain imaging right now in terms of some new networks that are being discussed and things, and some of this work has come out from Evan Gordon, who was the kind of previous interviewee on the OHBM Neuroscience podcast.
Yeah.
So the before Messalem. And I forget what he called it, but it's like deep scanning or something like that. And what he meant by it was just like, usually we, if we're going to get a resting data set on someone, we'll get like 8 minutes or 10 minutes or something like that. And he was just like, well, what happens when we get 4 hours or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And again, like, we don't think about experiments over this kind of time period. It's super hard to follow. Again, like, I forget the child's database, but it was some crazy psychologist professors who basically recorded their kids for like 2 years or something like that. Like, those kinds of data sets are really hard to get, right? Putting people in, so 3 months is hard too. But in 3 months, you can literally go from not speaking a second language to speaking it.
Yeah.
And being able to capture that, it's not the same as first language acquisition, but being able to capture that is a really unique opportunity to look at language acquisition. And anyway, this paper just has thoughts about that. Because well, I'm curious. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, that's great. Let's see. We had a couple comments here in the chat. Jesse said, when I have more time, I want to dive a bit more into some things that were mentioned earlier to get on board soon to get aboard a plane. Also following up on the conference and other topics Morgan mentioned before. And then Hussain has a link to the Danny Bassett video here. And then Amanda said, I had to go talk to you soon. So great. So yeah, that was a good discussion. Hopefully, maybe we can pick that up in the Slack. If it's or maybe we can do some things with that. We've been talking about developmental AI as a strategy. It's kind of an in-house term we use, but there are ways that we can use some of these newer studies and maybe think about using data sets in new ways. So that'd be interesting to follow up on. Okay. Well, thanks for attending. Have a good week.